Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Don Dev Podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, which I highly recommend you do, we have quite a few changes. Before we were starting to record this podcast, we pretty much decided to overhaul the entire look of it. So there's now a face cam of guest and host. So today we're going to talk about doing what works and not doing what doesn't. As we've said in previous podcasts, we have completed our first game, been in the process of trying to sell it, prototyping other games. Stay tuned. And as far as marketing and audience growth goes, there's a few things that I think I've learned that I want to change, and things that what the podcast title says, stop doing what's not working, do more of what is working. So that's what we're going to discuss today. So I have with me our creative director, William Chappell, and our lead developer, John Grady. Welcome. So the first thing I want to start out with is I don't like our blog. The thing about it is, and I've said this before, is it's almost like lost in the sea. Tim Ruswick and I discussed this a little bit when we did our interview. Great, by the way. A blog can be good, but if it's on your own website, it's kind of up to you to promote it. And we had one really successful blog post that got syndicated by GamesBeat, and for a few days, blog views went way up and then back down to nothing, resulting in almost no followers on any channels, no email subscribers, no nothing, even though it got something like 1,200 views at its peak. So I just don't think it's worth the time to do, because they take a while. And they take certainly longer to produce than a podcast or, say, a short YouTube video, and I just don't see any benefit. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think I would say that I like reading some of the blog posts, and they're a bit more directly about what we're doing and what we're up to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if nobody ever sees them, it doesn't really matter.
I like them. I like a lot more professional and well curated and well presented than I think the podcast allows us to do. The podcast is a lot more informal, which is nice. It's a different tone. I kind of like to still do them, but save them for big things. Like, hey, we just got back from Pixel Pop 2018, and this is what happened, and this is what it was like, and here's a bunch of pictures and videos and cool stuff. Or, hey, we just announced a new game, here's a blog post about it. Beyond that, just for generally talking about the industry and game dev, I think the podcast works better. Maybe if we get to another project where we really want to cover its long-term development, a blog specifically for that game is a good way to do that.
I understand, but as a counter, hey, we just went to Pixel Pop 2018, we did all this cool stuff. Why don't I instead just make 5 YouTube videos that get 10 times the views?
Well, I would say let's do both.
That's yeah. But that's the thing, is it worth my time to do that if the other thing gets all of the attention and is easier to do?
I don't know. I like the I really like the format. That may just be a personal thing. I've really thought that in general we look our best on the blog.
And I think too that's a good point. Is some people might want to read the blog but never watch the YouTube video, so it might reach different people.
True.
The videos or the streams don't necessarily reach.
Okay. I think, and
I definitely think the podcast should be our focus, but I don't want to completely abandon the blog. Just maybe cut back to more important things.
Yeah. And the problem with it when we were doing it actively was consistency, because writing the blog posts in of itself was actually pretty easy. I literally wrote that blog post that got syndicated on my lunch break one day at work. It didn't take any time to write. The effort was all in making sure it was all good, in Squarespace, and setting up all the pictures, selecting the images I wanted, making sure everything's formatted just so, setting all the tags, making sure all of that was correct, making sure it was scheduled for the right time, all that. Like, that was the effort, like, and always is. But I agree with you guys. I think we should maybe make a blog post about that specific topic. Like, guys, you're not going to see a whole lot of actual blog posts because we're reserving that for important things. So
kind of sad.
maybe sort of revert, like, turn our blog into something like a Steam blog, because they really only do, like, biggish announcements on their blog, sort of like some smaller stuff, but and they're spread out. So okay, yeah, I think that's a pretty good compromise, like worth doing, but just not all the time. So all right, so moving on, a big thing with our last game, and surely upcoming games, is something, again, Tim Ruswick touched on. Game devs are not our target market. And it's really easy to start making posts, start making YouTube videos, start making all this stuff, talking to other game devs. But what is that really doing for us? I'm not saying that's not important to, build a community, be a part of a community. It's absolutely vital. But I feel like it's not reaching customers.
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at it in terms of target audience. First off, I don't think the podcast in general should be about reaching customers. The vast majority of our podcasts have not been about, hey, we're working on this game, you should buy this game, da 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 da. They've been much more our insights into things, and they give us, I think, a wider body of presence on the internet and a little bit of rep. It's one of those things where I don't know that you're ever going to be able to structure a podcast in such a way where it's going to directly help you move units,
right? And
you're also be genuine and meaningful and something people want to watch. I think we have to focus on content people want to enjoy, and if that has some spin-off effects on sales numbers on games or release, then great. But I really think it should own thing under the media arm of Somber Dawn, as it were, rather than under the game dev arm of it.
Gotcha. William, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's generally, yeah. As far as, like, if somebody is legitimately interested in our product or who we are, to actually go to our site or find us on YouTube or whatever, then we've already have made the contact with the person. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
They're already going to be. They already have that interest from somewhere else. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily move units, but it can make a more loyal fan base,
and
a following that's a lot more, that a lot more willing to talk about us, tell people about what we're doing.
It can also be a vlog. I mean, like, this particular moment and what we're discussing is less of a podcast covering how you should do things or what are ways to do things. We are literally discussing how should we do this. This is kind of in this moment right here is a journey through, the history and creation of Somber Dawn Studios and how we're going to do things going forward. It's an inside look, as it were.
Right. And one of the things I'm potentially wanting to do with the YouTube channel is shift to just more general content. Not something that's literally just ad after ad after ad, for buy our game, but like content where people will want to follow us and then potentially become customers, But then again, does that take too much focus away from game development?
Well, I would say no, and here's why. We cannot only brush up on our content creation. And when I say content creation, I mean, I'm not talking about like game assets and things, but like our video production and content creation and media creation skills we can't just practice those and get better at those when it's time to release a game. Games take a while to make. It takes a while to get good at that stuff. We're going to sink a few games because we have not so good trailers and not the coverage. If we don't do something to improve those skills on their own outside of game announcements and game releases.
That's a good point, because I've definitely, through simply just like, making this podcast, playing with the overlays and such. I mean, I'm already learning stuff that we can apply to game dev, and it's what do you think about that, Will?
I mean, if nothing else, too, the discussions that we have about different things that we're doing or industry news or events going on or anything like that, it also can be a way for us to kind of unwind our thoughts on it where we're together.
Mm-hmm.
So we can get a better understanding of where we're at in the cosmos of development or the industry in general.
Okay. All right, moving on to this topic. I'm really wanting to grow the mailing list, because that is how you directly, communicate with your customers. But I feel like we need something to give them of value, and not necessarily just something in our games, but like, again, I know I refer to him all the time because I love his videos, but Tim Ruswick, he gives like an indie game for that YouTube channel. His target market is actually indie game developers. So he gives them like, this, you can click on the button. It's like 68 tips for game development, and you click that and he sends it to you when you sign up for his mailing list. What are some things that we can give people maybe outside of our games? Cause like we're trying to, have, get new people, not necessarily people who are already, bought our games, to sign up for the mailing list. So what can we do, Will?
Well, actually, this kind of goes back to the previous question as well. Is we could would it be possible for us to give them this podcast like a week in advance, or a few days earlier, or something like that, where they could they can watch it before anybody else does?
Well, I mean, not just that, or on to the talk about wanting to make more general content. Me and you have talked a little bit about Game Dev School and what would be involved in doing that if we wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to make a series like that, it could generate a few videos that aren't publicly listed. And here's the link to this particular video.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I schedule the podcasts out, in advance, so I can make sure that all the social media and stuff like that is, on point. And maybe for the time being, until we can, think of something like a more tangible thing, like tangible digital thing, which is kind of contradictory, but to give them, maybe early access is good enough. People like early access, right? Like, I mean, early access is almost ad nauseum, like almost a problem, like you said, like on Steam, right? Like, so people do like it, like, so I like that idea. That's something. At least it's something we can start with and iterate on, which is important.
Yeah.
Start with giving them at least something that you can give them, and So, all right, I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah, I think this whole thing is long term. We've had a few discussions about how we're not going to get anything right on the first try and iterate it over time. I mean, that's the whole point of this particular podcast is working what's not and how to address and pivot on those issues.
Right. So, and we've kind of talked about this already, but do we want to kind of venture more into content creation on YouTube? Me specifically, obviously, like, you guys would still be, doing background like game work and stuff like that when I'm doing that. But should I focus my efforts a lot more on content creation and give it a shot?
I really think we need to sit down and really solidify a good consistency strategy for Twitter and all those things.
Right.
But yeah, aside from that and figuring out, we need to have some discussions about some Prismino assets and announcing that. But
Did you basically just announce it?
this is our pre-announcement announcement for Prismino.
Hey, there you go. If you're listening to the podcast right now, you heard about our new game before anybody else. So
we mentioned it a couple times, but
yeah,
we're getting very close to the official announcement.
Yeah.
But no, I really do think that that is something worth looking into, and we're getting to the point where we are accruing enough knowledge to be helpful to people in that realm. There are things that I can do in GML that would make great tutorials. There are things you've learned on marketing that would be helpful for people to get a little insight into. So there's definitely content we can make about making games, and there may be other content as well.
I feel like I could, like, you kind of bouncing off of what you just said, like, the thing that comes to mind immediately is I had to sit down recently because it is harder than it should be to make a high quality GIF, and so many people don't know how to do that, like, without butchering like the actual quality of it, high frame rate, stuff like that. It's kind of hard, and I had to sit down and like just hammer out, like, okay, what is each step I need to do to take this from After Effects, into Imager onto social media without it losing its quality, like something like that. I think those types of videos are worth making, and
yeah, absolutely.
But then again, going back, is that too much of a focus on reaching out to other game devs, or what should the primary effort be?
Even if it is, I'll say a couple things on that. Firstly, game devs are game consumers.
That's
Maybe
true.
not on the same level because we're busy people and don't have as much time to play games as we would like, generally speaking. But the other thing being is it increases presence. It increases the likelihood that, other people in the media would pick us up, with an announcement or something like that. And at the same time, it does partially become a question of what can we do with the media arm to justify the media arm by itself. The media arm doesn't necessarily need to sell games,
right,
in order to be justified. If the media arm can pick up ad revenue and Patreon revenue, then that alone is justification for its existence.
right.
I mean, personally, if it doesn't kill us and it helps people, I think that's justification for its existence. But I've been told I make bad business decisions sometimes. So.
Okay, so Will, what do you think? Like, should the focus be like game dev tutorials, stuff like that? Should it be kind of talking about game news, more general population stuff that could potentially get more clicks, or should it be a mix of both? Should there not necessarily be one or the other as the number one priority versus number two? What do you think?
I guess there's a lot of different strategies that I've seen different YouTube channels using.
I would really like. I would like to cover the news. That does get general people in.
Mm-hmm.
I will say you have to be careful covering the news because it's real easy to get demonetized with the current way the apocalypse is working and everything. Unfortunately, we have a lot of bad actors in our industry, and that means sometimes your commentary has to be negative on what they're doing, and at the moment, YouTube doesn't like any kind of negativity. So those videos might be less likely to get ad revenue, but at the same time, they are more likely to attract people who are interested in games.
Right. So do both, see what works.
Dev stuff is much more ad friendly.
Right. So I think the general strategy is do both, see what works, keep doing that.
Yeah.
Right. Sounds good. So you mentioned it a second ago, but if we're venturing, we've talked about a Patreon before, and it seems strange for a game dev company or a company that's making a product to me to have a Patreon when really why would I'm thinking as a patron, why would I subscribe to a Patreon when I'm already paying you for the product? You're not really. But if we're venturing more into content creation, is that a more justifiable thing to do? If you like this content, if you like what we're producing on this YouTube channel, if you want to support us, then here's our Patreon page. William, what do you think?
I absolutely think the Patreon should be focused on the media side of things.
Mm-hmm.
That I do. I feel like it has a bad taste if you try and fund your games, which are pay up front titles through a Patreon. If you're doing like free to play or something, then it's maybe a little more kosher. But I'm not sure I really like the idea of charging people for games and then asking them to do a Patreon too. Unless that Patreon is for the media arm and for game dev tutorials and things like that.
One thing I would say too about Patreon is that you can give your patrons stuff.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to just be you like our stuff, you don't, you pledge money to us every month because you want to continue seeing the content. It could also be if you like the games we make, maybe you can get announcements or news about them, or even maybe early demos or something as a Patreon because you like our stuff, so you're willing to support us and get something back for it as well.
Yeah, I can think of a few things that we could do for Patreon, like maybe when we do podcasts or whatever, maybe if you're a patron, you have kind of priority in your comments potentially being taken, read on the podcast, stuff like that. There's a million different ways to do that.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of things you can do with shout outs and various other things.
They could even contribute topics to discuss.
Right. This is something that I've been wrestling with for like the past week or two, and I can't decide what we want to do. Obviously, Twitch has a bigger audience than YouTube streaming right now, but do I want to divide my efforts between live streaming the content like the podcast we're doing right now on Twitch and putting it on YouTube, or should we just stream on YouTube and not necessarily maintain a Twitch page? The more Patreon stuff like Patreon, Twitch, social media stuff, the more we have to manage it. Is it too unwieldy?
It is a lot to do, but I mean, I guess my question would be is, I'm assuming we can't ingest to both at the same time. When we're live, we can only be live on one. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe so. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we can only do one. I would have to run like multiple instances of OBS Studio and stuff like that. Yeah.
What I would say is probably best to go live. Probably best to do it based on the content. There's probably content that would live better on Twitch, and there's probably content that would live better on YouTube, and there's probably content that would do better live on Twitch and then have the recording uploaded to YouTube. And we probably should look at it that way. We should probably put content where that content belongs, and will be the most effective. Will,
what do you think?
I mean, yeah, I would say like we've got a lot of love from Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
Past, a lot of other streamers and whatnot. And so I kind of like the idea of us streaming there as a priority.
Mm-hmm.
But and then I mean, the vast majority of people just watch the uploaded content on YouTube, and if we're going to record it and upload it anyway, I mean, what's the real benefit of YouTube Live if it has less activity than Twitch does?
Right.
I mean, I could see us going to YouTube Live when we want to. I mean, I 6 o'clock in the morning, I wake up, I'm working on some engineering, and I'm just like, screw it. I'm gonna post an announcement and be on YouTube Live this morning and do a dev slash AMA stream.
Right.
It's there's no reason to close those doors other than not giving something so much attention that it dies off and atrophies. We need to make sure that stuff does go to Twitch and does go to YouTube and that nothing ignored. The way the blog has kind of been for a little bit. I do agree with you. We really need to make some kind of announcement as to what's going on with the blog, on the blog.
Right. And I was going over this with, I think, both of you, but like, it's ridiculous how much more traffic the podcast gets than the blog. Like, on average, like, and I'm sure that's huge thanks to iTunes, and of course, like, more recently YouTube, because the one we did over EA's situation got definitely more views than any other video we've posted so far. So that's why the blog has kind of been ignored, is because it's we started the podcast and almost immediately it was getting more followers, more views.
Yeah, I'm fine with that in a general term. Like I said, we discussed this a little bit. I just think we ought to make some kind of announcement for the 5 people who are watching the blog, as it were.
And again, that, like you said earlier, there's no point in closing a door that you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah.
Well, I think there is some value in closing a door if the door is not maintained.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, too, the blog could function as like he was talking about on major events and stuff. It could be a go-to page that you can link to if all else fails.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to retread it. We've already covered it a good bit in the podcast. I was just saying, like, we need to make sure we make some kind of post there, so it's not just like, hey, why hasn't there been a blog post in 6 months? Does this company still exist? Like, what's going on?
Right. I agree. And I'll get to work on that, kind of explaining kind of what we've covered here. Just, the blog's not dead. It's going to be used for, major announcements. If you want to see blog-like content, follow us or subscribe to us on YouTube. Maybe follow us on Twitch, Twitter. Those are the best places to get our day-to-day content, not the blog. All right. I'm also kind of this has been a shorter podcast, which is kind of intentional because I've seen a little feedback. I want to play around with the length of the podcast, because some people like super hours long podcasts. Listen to any, like, the Joe Rogan Experience can go on for 3 or 4 hours sometimes, and some people like that. But other people, like, I've seen comments already, like, in the game dev world on podcasts, saying like, wow, this is like 45 minutes, an hour. That's so long. So we'll see. We'll see what length does to view count, does to minutes watched, all those analytics. So anything in general that you think we need to do more of that's working, me or you guys, or anything that's not working that we're currently doing that we need to stop doing?
Just from the basics of the analytics that I've seen, like just the Google Analytics, Reddit works.
Oh yeah. I've been on me some Reddit when I have anything to share, podcasts. They give us a lot of love, So, and those smaller, to any game devs watching, don't just throw your stuff on like gaming or games. Throw it on smaller subreddits. Like Game Dev's a really good one. If you're don't just like spam Game Dev with your like promotion or whatever. Like, if you have something helpful, put it there. But like there are smaller, like we recently did our first Steam sale. We participated in the autumn sale, and I posted that to Steam Deals, and it was a small enough subreddit to where even a few upvotes kept it on the front page for more than 24 hours. I think it was more than 48 hours. It was like number 5. So seek out smaller subreddits. They're really useful. Like, they don't have the massive amount of traffic, but they're really easy for, you can easily get views from them though. Like not a massive amount, but I guess the conversion rate is better, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and I would say probably the smaller the community, the more likely you are to acquire devoted evangelists about your stuff. I mean, if there are two game devs who show up into this tiny subreddit, those are the two game devs who are going to get the attention of those people.
Mhm.
Whereas, a bigger Reddit, they're going to have to devote their attention separately. I would say my biggest thing is we need to share more content. We've been making stuff for Prismino for a while, and none of it has shown up on socials or anything. And it's part of that's because we haven't announced, and we're trying to figure out how we want
Mhm.
to announce and this and that. But like at some point, we need to get over our self consciousness and be like, okay, hey, I can't tell you what it's for, but look at the thing. It's pretty and neat and does things.
Yeah. All right, and that's on me. I'll get cracking. Mm. All right. So I think we'll wrap up this episode. See what the shorter format does as far as interest, and if you have any commentary on if you'd rather see longer form podcasts, shorter form, or shorter form YouTube videos too, not necessarily podcasts. Get in those comment sections. Tweet at us. We love the feedback. It's kind of what we thrive on right now. We want to know what people want to hear. We want to know what people want to play too. So please,
Yeah, quick,
we're
quick
all
question
about that interaction.
is: do we want to have some kind of tag system or something or a banner image? Like we have drastically different podcasts. I mean, this podcast is basically been a live streamed business meeting almost. Like we're talking about what we're going to do. Whereas obviously the EA commentary is entirely different, and obviously there have also been podcasts on like, hey, here's some advice.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like those may have different audiences.
Right. And I'm definitely going to. I already have like a ton of ideas just for like quicker, shorter form YouTube videos that I'm going to experiment with. So, all right, we're going to wrap up this episode. Thank you, Will and John, for being on the podcast yet again. More to come. So sign up on the email list, follow us on all of our socials. Check out our YouTube channel because there's probably a lot of juicy stuff to come. So, all right. Thank you for listening.